So hi, everyone, and welcome again to our webinar, CAEL, Test Structure and Strategies to help you ace the speaking component. My name is Riley Cohen, and I'm the CEO here at CanadaVisa. I'd like to start by offering a generous welcome to Brandy Robb, our guest and CAEL test expert, and also Ivan Petrov, who is a regular here at our webinars with Prometric, CAEL, and CELPIP. So today we're going to take a deep dive into the speaking component of the CAEL language test, which can often be the most challenging to newcomers. The CAEL exam was developed by language experts in Canada to specifically reflect the Canadian classroom experience. It is accepted by over 180 academic institutions across Canada, and since 2023, the Student Direct Stream program also accepts CAEL results for expedited study permit applications. Today, we're very excited to have Brandy here with us presenting. Brandy is an online instructor and content developer at Prometric and has been teaching for more than 2 decades. She holds a BEd, BA, Honors English, and a CELTA. Throughout her career, Brandy has enjoyed teaching elementary school, ESL, college classes, continuing studies, and adult basic education courses. She has extensive knowledge of the CAEL language proficiency test, which is accepted by Canadian post-secondary institutions for academic study or for membership to a professional association. Brandy will present today for about 30 minutes, after which we will have a Q&A session with questions we select from the chat throughout the presentation. So please, whenever you have questions about the presentation, why don't you put your questions in the chat? We have a team of moderators that are going to save those questions for later, and we'll be sure to get to them in the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. Please remember that the chat is public, so do not share any personal information, such as your phone number or email. These messages will be removed from the chat. And again, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible in the Q&A session. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Brandy to begin the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen really quickly here so we can get the presentation started. All right. So again, as Riley says, we're here to learn specifically about the speaking components of CAEL. And I thank you so much for the warm introduction. I've been teaching about 25 years in total, mostly with adult learners, very much like yourselves, learning about different test components and English skills in general. I've been teaching for the CAEL test for about 4.5 years. So it's my pleasure to be here today to dive in a little bit more deeply, all about the speaking components of your CAEL test. So again, you would take CAEL if you were looking to study at the post-secondary level in Canada. So all the major universities and colleges will accept the CAEL score as proof of your language ability to allow you to enter and study successfully at the beginning of your program. So in the next half hour or so, what I'd like to do with all of us watching is I'll give a very quick overview of what your speaking test is going to look like and how it's scored. CAEL is an online test, so we need to know what your computer screens will look like so that you'll be comfortable finding information to help you answer. After we've understood the basics, we're going to actually do a little bit of practice. I've got 2 different practice test questions from a past CAEL test. We're going to look at those questions, and as a group, I've got 2 actual answers from real test takers when they encountered these questions on their tests. So we're going to listen to these people's answers today, and we're going to discuss quickly as a group what these speakers did very well, and we'll also identify a few areas of weakness. So by the time we're finished today with this response analysis, I hope we all have a better understanding about the speaking skills we'll want to demonstrate if we do take CAEL in order to maximize our score on the speaking component. So let's get underway. We'll talk quickly about the scoring first. So the entire CAEL test is scored out of what we call bands. And if you see here, you'll notice that they are in increments of 10. So the entry level score at the very bottom of this score chart is a level 10 or a band 10, we'll call it. That would be your beginner learner in English proficiency. And we simply count by 10s all the way up to the top of the chart, which is band 90. So that would be the highest score anybody could achieve on a CAEL component. And if you are achieving a band 80 or even a 90, it's already demonstrating expert proficiency with your English language skills. I would say on average, most universities and colleges and perhaps employers if you're taking CAEL for that, they're looking for a band 70, give or take. But again, if you've already got your eye on a particular school in Canada, it's really important that you do your own research. Check with the specific institutions where you might be applying. They will let you know what score they require from you. Every school sets its own entry-level scores, and they might be a little different depending where you apply. So again, band 70 is about an average. A lot of institutions look for that, and 70 says that you are adept. So this means you've got a strong foundation, but there are perhaps some other skills that you're still developing, which is normal when you're starting a university program or starting your first year in a new career. We're not expected to know all the skills off the top. So again, band 70 would allow you then to continue to grow your skills. So that's how this test is scored. No half scores, always an even number, right out of 10. Now your entire test has 5 parts, as you can see here. They will test you on your speaking, reading, listening, and writing. But in today's session, we're only going to look at the speaking questions. And I bolded these in red for you so you can see that there are 5 of them, and they basically occur in the first half of this test. You'll get 3 speaking questions in part 1. You'll be talking basically about yourself, your education. There will be a visual question as well, something like a graph that you might have to talk about and discuss. When you get to parts 2 and 3, you'll be giving a little bit of an academic speech about something you've learned through either a reading passage or a lecture. So we won't have time to look at all 5 speaking parts today, but I've selected 2 of them to give us a good taste of what the speaking skills will demand of you, I guess, on your CAEL test. So remember, this is an online test. So when you start your entire CAEL test, you can see the computer screen. This is exactly what it would look like. You'll notice we're on part 1, speaking, and this screen just tells you its instructions. There's no timer on this screen, so your test hasn't officially started yet, but you'll be wearing a headset through the entire test, and you'll hear an automated voice read these instructions aloud to you. I'll read them now, just so you'll have a sense of what you would expect. It says here, your professor asks you a question. You have 30 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to answer the question. Your preparation time starts on the next page. So at this point, you've got 2 options. You can either sit and just take a few deep breaths and gather your thoughts and wait for 8 or 9 seconds perhaps, and the computer will then automatically move you over where you'll officially begin your speaking test. Or what I would probably do, I would just click this next button right up here in the top right-hand corner, and it's going to move you immediately right over to the beginning of the test. So you would just complete the entire CAEL test a little bit more quickly if you did that. But once you land on your official test, you'll know the test has started because you'll see the timers up here. This one tells you you've got 30 seconds to prepare, and you will be speaking for 60 seconds total. So this is the very first question on the CAEL test. It's simply called independent speaking, type A. And type A just means question number 1. So any question for the 5 speaking CAEL components you'll encounter, they'll be right in the middle of your screen to the right-hand side. So you can't miss them. They'll be facing you the entire time as you speak. And you can imagine as you're sitting in front of your computer taking this test, remember that headset you're wearing, you actually have a microphone attached to that headset, and you will be recording your voice into that microphone to answer any question presented to you on the speaking test. So it's reassuring to know that you'll never face a human examiner in real life who's interviewing you to see what your speaking skills are like. So on CAEL, again, it's you, it's your computer, and it's your answer speaking into the microphone, which helps us reduce anxiety to a little degree anyway. Now, there are instructions over here as well on each screen, but I think once you've learned how the structure of the test goes, I don't think you would need to give up any precious preparation time to read these again. You would probably know this information when you take the test. But of course, we'll read it together now in case some of us are new. So the instructions just remind you as you're speaking to give details and examples to support your response. You will be evaluated on the content of your response and the accuracy of your language. So remember, this is an academic test. So the language we include as we speak should be precise, should be academic, should be high level, sophisticated if we can. At no time do we want to draw in idioms or slang expressions. Those would not provide an academic tone. So this is a gentle reminder of that to bring our best vocabulary forward. Now, some people do choose to take notes as they have their prep time, and that's a very helpful strategy. If we could write down just a couple of key points that we'll want to talk about once the recording starts, we'll have that note paper right in front of us. So if you're in a test center taking CAEL, you'll actually be given paper and pen, and you can use those at your computer to take notes. But you do have the option, depending which country you live in the world, to take CAEL from your home computer. And if that's your choice, then instead of using paper and pen, you'll be asked to use what we call Scratchpad. And Scratchpad is basically an online note paper, as you can see. It looks like this little box. So when you click the Scratchpad button on screen, it's going to open up the little note paper online, and you can type in there and keep your ideas in front of you as you speak. So it should help organize your ideas too. You don't have to use the notes if you don't want to. The Scratchpad on screen, you can move around or exit out or minimize it. Again, it's totally up to you, but it is there in case you do prefer taking notes as a guide to keep you organized. Now, when your recordings are finished, when the whole test is done, the 5 speaking recordings that you have completed are going to be sent off to the trained raters. And right now, these are human raters, at least 3 of them. And they are going to listen to the recordings that you've made, and they are specifically listening for you to demonstrate as many strengths as you can in these 4 key areas. So starting at the delivery skills, these are your first 4 elements. We have to think about what we can do with our own voices to make sure that the listener can understand us. And I think these skills transfer into just about any language, not just English. So clearly we need to speak loudly enough so that our voice is being picked up by the microphone. We don't need to scream into the mic, but of course, talking at a good volume will be helpful. Talking at a comfortable speed is also helpful. So not too fast, not too slow, just like you're having a conversation with a friend, if you will. That same natural rhythm is important. And of course, pronunciation is key. Now, it's perfectly fine if we've got different accents. That's going to happen. We've got so many people from around the world living in Canada. So we will encounter accents, all different ones throughout our days usually. We live in bigger cities. So the accent itself is perfectly fine. We just need to learn how to stress the words so that they're easily understood. It's a matter of blending our sounds together in a way that the listener can follow here. And once we've mastered those foundational skills, we then try to fine-tune our speech by practicing at home, speaking aloud for a minute or 2 minutes at a time, answering some practice questions. And we want to move our speech forward from beginning to end with very few pauses or interruptions, if we can help it. So at no time do we ever want to stop and sit quietly for 5 or 6 seconds just thinking. Hopefully we have got something that we can talk about to keep that time moving forward. We try our best not to interject. So interjections are those funny sounds we make sometimes, like or and it's natural to interject once in a while, but we just don't want to do it so often that it's starting to interrupt the flow of the speech. So all of these skills take practice. My best advice to any of you who are seriously considering taking any language test, frankly, is you'll want to maybe record your own voices as you practice speaking at home. And it might be uncomfortable to listen to yourself back, but when you listen to the recordings you make, you will be able to use this checklist and double check to see, are you interjecting? Are you pausing? These are things that we need to know before we come into the testing room. That's all about delivery. Your accuracy of language, again, it's an academic test. So the words that we choose to include in our speech, first of all, have to make sense. That's step 1. We need to understand the meaning of what it is we're talking about. And then step 2 would be to try to choose words that are more precise and specific. Academic would be higher level. So we want to avoid very vague and general language. We don't want to use words like thing or stuff or guys or person. These words don't tell us a lot. We want to really elevate or punch up the language so that it's more focused, it's more interesting, and again, more academic. As we speak, it's important to note that our sentence structure and our grammar is actually going to be assessed. So the raters just have a recording of your answer. They won't have a transcript, but they can tell just by listening if we're speaking in longer, more complex sentences. That's going to help you earn a higher score. So we don't want to just speak in short, simple sentences all the way through. That's not quite as high level or academic. And again, grammar is really important, whether we're speaking or even writing. So think about your verb tenses, your preposition use, your subject-verb agreement, all of these other language skills that hopefully we're learning all about. Moving on to the content section, you'll be speaking either for 60 seconds, 90 seconds, or a full 2 minutes. And you'll always see the timer on screen to know how long your answer will be. So at the beginning of each answer, it's really important to give a little introductory statement so that the listener knows the specific topic that the test question is asking you to address. And once your introduction is complete, it's usually 1 sentence, 2 sentences at most, we then provide our first main point, and we're going to back up that main point with some specific examples. In a 60-second question, you might have time only for 2 main points, and that's fine, but just make sure you've given examples and details to fully explain each of those main points. And hopefully we've got time for a little concluding statement at the end, so the listener knows that we're finished. And last but not least, we've got some task fulfillment elements here, numbers 17 and 18 on this chart. It's important to speak for close to the full time on the test. So again, if it's a 90-second question you've been asked to complete, you don't have to get exactly 90 seconds in time, but you should be fairly close. So even 83 seconds, 84 seconds, that would be fine, provided you've given a very full answer, which leads us to the last point here. We need to make sure we've answered the entire question. And as you'll see now, as we look at some practice questions, a lot of CAEL questions themselves focus on 2 parts. So if you've been asked to speak to 2 different parts of a main topic, please make sure you're balancing your answer out and addressing both of them. It's really going to help with your task fulfillment. So we'll do 1 practice question from part 1 of your CAEL test. This is the quickest part of the entire test itself. It only takes 10 minutes to deliver 3 different speaking answers. We call it independent speaking because you're only speaking. This does not involve reading, listening, or writing. It's just about the speaking in this first part of your test. So again, your first 2 questions are all about you. You'll notice if you take a lot of our webinars or look at our free practice tests online, a lot of these questions in part 1 deal with you and your own educational experiences. So my best advice to you before you come into the test is perhaps to review some of your own experiences you've already had in life, whether that be high school, even elementary school, university. I think refreshing our memories and having these details at the fore of mind coming into the test is going to help us think of ideas quickly as we speak. The third question will be a little chart or a graph that you'll have to describe as well. So the way that these questions work, you'll be speaking again either for 60 seconds or 90 seconds. You'll get a little bit of preparation time first. It will be quick, admittedly, but you'll get either 30 seconds or 60 seconds to read through your question, think about your main points, and perhaps write them down. Just the keywords, just to get yourself focused. After that prep time has finished, you'll be asked to speak. You'll hear that automated voice talk to you through the headset, and it will say, "Start speaking now." You'll just start speaking naturally, and the microphone will register your voice. And that, again, as we said, those recordings get sent off to the raters later on, so they can listen and give you a band score accordingly. So we're going to look at this practice question here together as a group. It says, what do you want to study at university and why? So this was once a real test question from a past test. You'll never see it again in the future, but we can certainly use this one as a good practice. And when you begin your screen, remember to look up at the timer. So you're reminding yourself you've got 30 seconds to think and 60 seconds to speak. So filling 60 seconds, we could probably come up with 2 reasons why we've chosen a particular subject. We might have time for a third. So that's how I'd encourage you to approach this. Make sure you know how much time to fill with the speaking, and it will help you plan the number of details accordingly. So I'm going to show you how one test taker, whose answer we're going to listen to, how she used her 30 seconds of preparation time to plan for this exact question. So you can see I've got the question at the bottom of the screen. So in 30 seconds, we need to skim read the question quickly. It shouldn't take more than 3 or 4 seconds, honestly, to read this question over. It's quite short. And again, you notice there are 2 parts. So the what we want to study, that part's very easy. And within 3 or 4 seconds, I hope anybody could just pick a subject. Maybe you've already completed a degree. And if so, I would use those experiences and just frame your answer as if you were going to take a class at university. So adapt it a little bit so it fits the question. If this were my question, my answer would be English. I became an English teacher and I've been doing that for 24 years. So that would be easy for me. Whatever career you're looking at or perhaps have already studied, that's what I would advise you pick so it's fresh. And then of course the why takes a little bit more time to think about. But let's see how this test taker, who we're going to listen to, made some notes. So I'll show you some notes that she did make. The notes you write, by the way, are only seen by you. They don't count for your score at all. So don't worry about handwriting. It doesn't have to be neat. Don't worry about grammar. Just write down your ideas quickly. Use short forms as well, as this woman has demonstrated. So if we look at her notes, I'm going to decipher, I assume, that the very major or subject she wants to study looks like it's psychology. So I see the word psych up top, and I'm guessing that's probably her major. Now that second line is a minor, and sometimes people take a secondary subject, and I'm guessing it has to do with classics of some sort. My assumption though, and again, once you're familiar with your CAEL test, it's only a 60-second question. I frankly don't think she's going to have time to give details about 2 different subjects. So bear this in mind, please. When you're doing a 60-second question, I think one singular focus is best. So if she just talks about psychology, it looks like those last 3 points give main reasons why she wants to study psych anyway. So please don't overload your question when you focus on a singular topic as the question is asking you to do. It's usually easier for you as well. So if we can guess what her 3 points are, it looks like it has something to do with psychology and the relationship between people's behavior and their mind. The second point looks like it has something to do with motivation and personality, perhaps. And that third point, I'm guessing, means language acquisition. And she's going to really look at the psychology behind the language. So these are all upper level ideas or reasons. So this does present an academic tone. And already in her notes, she's using some very specific and precise word choices, such as language acquisition. That sets a very academic tone. So even in your notes, if you could write with that academic register, it's going to help you pull those ideas out as you talk. So let's listen to her deliver this answer. She's going to tell us what she wants to study, presumably psychology, and the reasons behind it. After we've listened to her response, we're going to quickly go through this checklist that we've already discussed and point out some of the elements she's done very well and maybe some areas where she still wants to work on. After we've discussed it, we're going to launch a poll here, and we're going to ask all of you what score you feel this woman earned on her CAEL speaking test. So get ready to deliver your guesses there as well. And by the way, as we listen to the responses, we're going to also follow a transcript. I think it's easiest when we're learning together. The raters will not have a transcript, but we're going to follow it. So you can look at the word choice and the ideas and such. So here's her response. It's 60 seconds. Let's listen now.
I'm a 5th-year student in UBC majoring in psychology and minoring in classical, Near Eastern, and religious studies. And so I guess in that way, I've already decided what I want to study in university. The reason that I wanted to major in psychology is because I've always been interested in the way that human behavior is shaped by the human mind. Everyone has different motivations and different personalities, and that affects how our actions come. So I was very interested in learning about that, particularly also in language acquisition, the psychology behind language, and how there's a certain point in our lives where we are able to pick up language more easily, and also just how the environment and our genes and all sorts of different factors affect our lives in ways that we don't even realize. And I also minored in classical study.
Haha, she got cut off at the end, so I knew she wouldn't have time to talk about 2 subjects. That's a lesson that we can all learn from her. But apart from that, I think the rest of this response is quite well organized. So let's very briefly discuss the strengths here. So if we just focused on those speech delivery skills, I think we can argue that the basics have been demonstrated quite well. So she's speaking at a comfortable speed and volume. Her pronunciation is very clear. The rhythm and the intonation is all quite natural as well. She does have a few pauses there. You can see we've included the ... dots within the transcript itself, but the pauses themselves are not for so long that they interrupt the flow. So even if we hadn't had this transcript in front of us, even with our eyes closed, I think most of us could follow what she was saying and keep engaged by the sound of the voice. It was clear to listen to. So the delivery skills were done quite well. If we look at the language use now, let's start with the sentence structure and connections. So in red here, you can see some of the connecting words or conjunctions that she's using to really bridge her ideas together. And even though grammatically they're fine, I think if you look at the repetition and the simplicity, I think you'd agree that maybe there's a little bit of room for development here. So and so and also are fairly simple connecting words. And as you can see, she's used those conjunctions almost exclusively. There's not a lot of variety. So please bear that in mind. The raters themselves, as they listen, they want to see as many language skills as you can demonstrate. So the more variety and the different types of structures you can create while speaking, that's going to support a stronger score. So her connections or transitions are a little bit of a weakness, I would say, she'd want to work on. But her actual word choice, the vocabulary here is done very well. All of these words in blue that we've picked out demonstrate accurate word choices for the topic. She's been asked to speak about what she would study and why. So it makes sense to see words in the beginning, like majoring and minoring in these different subjects. And a lot of these other examples, like your different motivations and language acquisition, psychology behind language, and so on. So she, again, shows quite a variety of words and phrases, and she uses them appropriately, and she's creating that academic tone that the raters like to see. There's one example right in the middle. You'll notice it's been bolded. It says, how our actions come. So that phrase itself is a little bit too casual for the speech itself, but it's only one tiny little phrase. And she more than makes up for that with all of her other wonderful word choice. So again, on this language test, please don't aim for perfection. The raters aren't expecting you to be perfect. It's difficult to have a question and think on the spot quickly. So there's a bit of flexibility that goes with that, provided that your little mistakes are just that, they're little or minor, and they don't happen very often. It's still very possible to score a high band score on your test. As you can see, she's got so many more examples of appropriate language, so she more than makes up for that one casual expression that isn't the best choice. Her content has also been delivered quite well. I love her opening. She tells us, she fills in some really important details that are just adding interest and focus. So she starts by saying she's a fifth-year student. She's studying at UBC. The question didn't ask you to add these details in, but it makes sense to do this in your introduction. You're setting the context or setting the stage. And immediately she identifies her major, which is exactly right. We want to get to the main topic right away, so we've got the rest of the time to support it. And in, I guess it's sort of an orangey brown print there, you can see those 3 bulleted points from her notes as she's tried to explain them or expand on them throughout the answer. So that first one, talking about how behavior is shaped by the mind, she gives us a little bit of an explanation. Language acquisition, she has time to point out a few things. But again, I think there's a few missed opportunities. So I've got a laser pointer here, and I wanted to look at this one. So when she says language acquisition, she defines that as the psychology behind language, and she ponders, there's a certain point in our lives, is there a certain point in our lives where we can pick up or learn a language more easily? So that's a very interesting psychological focus. But I think when we talk about a certain point, this is a little bit general or vague. I think she probably could have gone for a more precise approach and phrased it such as, is it easier for young children to acquire the language they need to develop, or is it easier for the adolescent or older adult? So by really pinpointing the precise ages or stages of life, that would have been a lot more precise for your word choice for vocabulary, but it would also help to support the content detail a lot more specifically than talking about a certain point. So again, this is a good answer, but we're looking at ways that we could go even further with that precision. This last point is a wonderful idea, but she ran out of time to develop it. She talks about nature versus nurture, environment and our genes. And as you can see, she didn't develop or give any supporting details, and instead she tried to sneak in this detail about her minor subject. So as we said earlier, it's better to present your main ideas, support them fully, and don't worry about squeezing in extra details later. If you don't have time to fully develop those extra details, it's probably best not to even start. Again, you've only got 60 seconds, and believe it or not, it goes quickly once you start talking. So she probably could have even included 2 points and fully expanded upon them as well. But again, as you can see, it's still a very well-organized response from beginning, middle to end. She spoke for the 60 seconds. She answered the question fully. She did give us what she wanted to study and why. So her task fulfillment has been done correctly. So we're going to, Riley, is it possible to launch our first poll here today? And we'll see how our viewers are going to vote. And if not, I can simply ask the question. Maybe we'll just ask the question today for time's sake.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Did you want to launch the poll? I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you.
Yeah, sorry, the poll's launched, but I think the chat's going to see it in just a minute. There's a bit of a delay.
I see. Okay, thank you. Yes, so I'll explain while we're waiting for that poll to come up. So we just talked about this response in quite a bit of detail. And before we can determine any score, we need to fully understand the strengths and weaknesses in the entire checklist, all 4 areas. So speech delivery, vocabulary, content, task fulfillment. And once we do weigh the strengths against the weaknesses, in that case, we're now in a position to put together the final score. The final band score never is derived from just one analysis. So sure, we could say, wow, her speech was wonderful. Band 90. It's not how it works, unfortunately. So the raters do need to see evidence of strengths across all 4 categories to determine the rounded score to the nearest 10. So that's how these scores are going to be developed. Anyway, I'll leave it to Riley there and let me know when the poll is visible.
So can you see we're already starting to get some responses. Are you able to see on the right side of your screen the polls icon? No? Okay, so
No.
I'll summarize quickly the results we got in. It's pretty even from across all the bands, but the 2 leading ones with 28% is band 80 and also with 28% band 60. And then band 90 and band 70 around 20%. So it seems like it's pretty consistent across all the bands.
Interesting. And again, if you're brand new to CAEL, it's really hard. The first assessment we do is the most challenging because you've got nothing to compare this to. So yes, it can be difficult. Do we want to give just another, say, 10 seconds and then we'll close the poll? And I will tell you what score she got. So get your answers in if you want to participate. All right, are you ready for the big review? So this woman actually earned a band 70 overall on her entire CAEL speaking test. Now that doesn't necessarily mean she got a band 70 on this exact answer. It's a combination or an average of all 5 speaking responses she delivered. So you would get a score on all 5 responses, and then those scores would be averaged together, but they're rounded to the nearest 10. So band 70, remember, we said earlier, it's about the average score that most institutions would accept. It shows that you've got a strong foundation and you're just working on building up some of the weaker areas. So I think band 70 is a pretty good capture of her skill sets as well. So now that you know that this is a band 70, we've got time to do one other response and you'll be able to compare them and see perhaps who is a little bit stronger. So just to wrap up what we were speaking to about this independent speaking, remember, you've got 30 seconds to read the question and think. So quickly, pick a main topic and go with it. Don't be indecisive and dilly-dally. That's a casual expression meaning don't go back and forth. Pick a topic, run with it. Think of at least 2 main ideas. In this case, it was reasons why we would study our subject. You might have time for a third. It all depends on the number of details that you've included. So be a bit flexible as you're speaking and watch that clock. It'll stop recording you as soon as 60 seconds have passed. Again, when we start, we want to set the tone. You can make an informational statement or, as this woman did, filled in some gaps about where she was studying and how long she'd been studying there. You can personalize the talk. Even though this is an academic response, it's okay to use I in these cases because it is all about you and in this case, your education. So that's a little bit about your independent speaking. We're going to take it up a notch actually into some academic speaking. So we're looking at the integrated components. So in both parts 2 and 3 of CAEL, part 2 focuses on the reading, and that's what we're going to look at. Part 3 is the similar structure, but with listening. But in both of these parts, what happens first is you either read an academic passage first, and then you would answer about 11 questions based on that passage. And right after you finish that, you will get a speaking question. It will ask you to talk about something you've learned throughout that reading passage. You'll have the reading passage in front of you as you speak, so you can draw out details to form your answer. And using the source material is part of your score alongside your content areas and so on. For the listening section, same idea, but in that case, you are listening to a lecture first. You'll answer about 11 questions based on what you've heard. And then the speaking question will ask you to speak about something you've learned from that lecture as well. So we're going to look at the reading section today, as we won't have time to do all parts of this CAEL speaking test in today's session. The raters are going to give you a score based on the same 4 components we've already examined. So that never changes. We always assess delivery, language, content, and task fulfillment. The other part we've added here, this is for your part 2, the speaking on the long reading has just a few other elements to consider. So again, your score will be helped by your ability to take relevant ideas from that reading source. And as you incorporate those ideas into your speech, you're hopefully using your own language or paraphrasing ideas. That's also going to help your score. So we're not going to look at the reading passage today. We're just going to focus on the speech somebody gave based on it, which is fine. If we look at the top here, we know that we've got 60 seconds to prepare an answer, but we're speaking for 2 minutes. And this is more of an academic presentation, if you will. So your screen looks similar. You can still see the question in the same place, but you've actually got 2 tabs to work between now. So your instructions will tell you that you can refer to that reading source by clicking on that reading passage up top. You are reminded to use the source, but explain in your own words. And again, your evaluation, we've already discussed. So these points I think you would know before coming into the real test. You probably wouldn't want to give up your prep time reviewing those, as you'll probably know these things already. So in your 60 seconds of prep time, you would read the question. This one says, why do engineering disasters happen? What are the causes of the errors? So remember, before the speaking question is presented here in part 2, you already would have read through the passage and answered 11 questions. So the material is very fresh in your mind. Now it's a matter of skimming and scanning through this document in order to pull out details that actually answers this question. So when you click on that reading passage tab at the top, it does pull up the same reading article you've already had a look at. So to take notes here, again, as always, we look at the question, and usually there are 2 parts in CAEL. We've got a why, we've got a what. So because we have these 2 parts to this question, in your 60 seconds, it might be helpful for you to take notes. I would make a 2-column approach here, like so. You could put the why and the what on either side or on either title. So we're looking just at the first paragraph of this reading passage. We're looking at it for the first time, but remember on the test, you already would have read this through in quite a bit of detail. So now it's a matter of skimming through and just pulling out details that answer one of these 2 questions. And I'll quickly demonstrate what that would look like. So the first one talks about a violation of codes of practice, and you might paraphrase that in your notes as not following industry rules. Another reason why these engineering disasters happen is because of poor communication, we can say, to make that our own. Maybe there was bad weather as well. Well, the construction process was underway. Looks like we've got some weak ethics too amongst the engineering industry as well, and so on. And you would continue to do this, filling in the other side as well, which we'll skip for time for today. Now, these notes are a little bit longer, likely, than what you'd have time for. I wanted to make sure you had the main ideas, but when you take notes, make them as short as possible. Just make sure that you remember what your short forms are for later on. So when it comes time to start your speech, I think getting started is the hard part, quite honestly. So here's a tip that might work for you. We're looking again at the very first paragraph of this whole reading passage. And as I scan it over with my eyes, I quickly noticed, of course, it's about engineering, but I noticed we talk about feats, which is accomplishments first, and then we segue into failures and tragedies. So just looking at the structure and knowing we have to discuss why these disasters are happening and what's causing them. You could go into your response with something like this. It might sound like everyone else, engineers aren't perfect, but their mistakes tend to be highly visible and attract lots of attention. So once you've opened that up, we know you're talking about engineering, and you've segued into the topic of disasters. So that's when you're ready to consult your notes and start listing examples that this article was giving you of these engineering disasters and discuss. You can't predict your closing before you get there as you speak, but I think as long as you've got your own transition coming into the test, that's really all you need. So if we were to hear you say in closing, or to summarize, or in conclusion, something to that effect, we'd know that your very last statement is coming about and you'll be finished with the speech. So again, quickly in your 60 seconds, read the question, understand the two parts of what you're asked to talk about, skim through that reading passage and jot down the relevant points that you're going to want to talk about. Okay, always use your own vocabulary because it will help with your vocab score. You can start thinking of your opening statement, but most of us would do that as the recording opens. We sort of have to be ready just to speak and give a sentence or two of introduction and so on. So we're going to hear our last sample response today. It's going to be a different female speaker answering the same question. And again, we've not read through this whole reading passage, but we will trust that she's using the information from the source to answer. So again, we'll listen, we'll follow, and we'll quickly point out strengths and weaknesses and guess her score. And then we'll be ready to close for the day.
Engineering disasters happen sometimes because of unforeseen weather conditions, such as natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, etc. But also, according to Miroslav Matusek and George Snyder, two researchers who did a study, found that the main causes of engineering failure include carelessness, negligence, and human unpreparedness. More recently, George Sowers looked at 500 cases of engineering failures and identified that 88% of these cases were due to what he called human shortcomings, with ignorance and not using the appropriate technology being the most common factors. What causes these errors is mostly a lack of communication. For example, in the walkway collapse in the Kansas City hotel, that was a lack of communication between the designer and the engineer. Sometimes these errors are caused by using the incorrect units in the case of the Mars Climate Orbiter. And also what could cause errors such as these is not having correct supervision, as it was the case in the error of the Quebec Bridge. All of these cases are human errors, things that could have been avoided had the right precautions been used. These would apply to George Sowers' 33% ignorance. And also to mostly a lack of communication.
All right. A challenging question to answer, no doubt. She's done a decent job. I would say as far as her speech goes again, first off, it sounds like she is a first language speaker. So that's clearly to her benefit. She's got her pronunciation and the basics covered. Her rhythm and intonation are natural, but you'll notice a lot more interjecting here as compared to the first woman. So we get a lot of these pauses and thinking of ideas and several of these ums and ahs. And they were borderline starting to interrupt the rhythm. So that would just be one little element of speech that somehow we'd want this test taker to practice a wee bit more on to move that speech forward. But overall, again, her speech, her sentence structure, her grammar, everything is on point. Her language, again, when you look at the way she's connecting ideas, we do have a slightly better variety of conjunctions and transitions, as we saw in that first example. So this second speaker is not just relying on words like and also. She uses those words sometimes, but she's starting to get into some different good variety. So most recently, and for example, so these are the types of transitions that you want to definitely demonstrate to give that variety. Like our first speaker, the second one also uses quite high level and appropriate academic language, as you can see in blue. The words here bolded in black are suitable The only issue is she's taken these directly from the reading source. So definitely her answer makes sense and all of the content is correct. And she's citing information from the sources quite well. But she's just having a slightly bigger challenge rephrasing them into her own language. So that's just something that the raters would note and say, good job, just try your best to paraphrase later on. But from a task fulfillment standpoint, she spoke for those 1 minute and 58 seconds. She answered the question fully, both sides of it. She definitely gives us a very strong introduction about engineering disasters happening and why. And she does come up with a conclusion to summarize, where she's really focusing on the miscommunications that occur. So it's very well organized as well. And as I say, task fulfillment is strong. Why don't we launch our last poll for the day, and we'll wrap this up. I'll come back to you and see if we can answer some questions that you might have too. So what score do you think this woman earned? And at least we have something to compare it against. So our first speaker, remember, earned a band 70 overall on her speaking test for CAEL. And 70, as we've also learned, is about the average score we're looking for. So you need to decide, I guess, if you think that this woman's skills are slightly higher, if they're maybe about the same, perhaps they're a little bit lower. So I'm curious to see how you're going to assess this one. And keeping in mind, all the scores are rounded to an even number out of 10. There is never a half score, not in CAEL. So let's see what happens. And I'll leave it to Riley to let me know, as I can't see the poll on the screen right now.
We got some answers coming in already. So we'll give it a minute, and then I'll let you know which band is the winner.
Yeah, I'm always curious to see what you think. And it's helpful for each of you as well, because knowing sort of what a band 70 sounds like, what a band 80 sounds like, it gives you a good sense of the skills that you'll want to demonstrate for sure.
Amazing. We'll just give it, I guess, a few more seconds for everyone to get in their vote.
Mm-hmm.
So 15 more seconds.
Sounds good. I wonder if we'll have a clear winner or if it will be more evenly divided like last time.
Looks like we have a clear winner.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we have a band 80 coming in at 40%. And then band 90 at 21 and band 70 at 21. Band 60 was the loser at 16%.
Okay. All right. You know what? I'm going to reveal that the majority has won this one. Yes, this is a band 80 speaker. And remember that band 80 captures the average of her score on all 5 responses. Now, we've only heard one of her answers, but it's a very good indication as to her ability. So both women did a fantastic job, but you can see that there's a slight edge here. There's a little bit more sophistication and ability to speak with those complex tones, I guess, as compared to the band 70. So nicely done. If that's what your assessment was, you didn't guess band 80, you were close. So don't feel too badly about that. So just to wrap up, and we'll come back for questions. When you are doing an integrated speaking question, whether it's on the reading, like we just did today, or perhaps on the listening section later, it's important to note the 2 parts to each question. There are usually 2. Use that precious 60 seconds of prep time to look through the reading source or to review the lecture notes on screen. I think it's wise if each of you took your own notes and just wrote down some of the points that you know you're going to talk about. Introduce the topic. In this case, we needed to know that engineering disasters were occurring and that we would discuss why those disasters were happening. Looking at your notes, you can help guide yourself and sequence or order the ideas. Try to fill 2 minutes, and this is a challenge. It's why we need to practice at home with a timer, so you develop a feel for what 2 minutes will sound like to you. Try your best as well not to just talk in circles or ramble on to fill the time. So we really do want to organize the topic, give lots of main points from the article with supporting details and examples from the passage itself. And somehow we want to end with a closing statement. So in this case, remember our speaker just reminded us that miscommunications were generally the biggest challenge. At any rate, I'm going to come back to you now. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we might have some questions about the CAEL test or the speaking test in particular. So let me do that here.
Thank you so much, Brandy, by the way. And I also realized I forgot to give Ivan a short introduction here at the beginning of the webinar. But just quickly, Ivan is the Manager of Business Development at Prometric, and supports the assessment mandates of academic institutions, government, and strategic stakeholders, focusing on improving meaningful and equitable outcomes for institutions and learners. In the past, Ivan has served as an account director and manager of academic relations for Prometric's English language and prior learning assessment programs, and spent years working in experiential learning and edtech, focusing on the U.S. academic ecosystem, public policy, and academia. Just giving Ivan a short introduction here, but thanks for joining. Thank you, Brandy, for the presentation. We have 5 minutes here for questions, but I'll try to get to the great ones we received. I guess the first question here is, how does CAEL take into account country-specific language variation? So different countries will use language slightly differently. Will I be penalized for using words like shifting instead of moving in my language response?
So the way that's a very fair question to ask, so thank you for that. The way the language test would be assessed is that provided the words that you've included within your speech make sense so that the meaning is very easy to discern. So if you were to use, your example is a great one actually, shifting versus moving, provided you've positioned that word shifting in the sentence in a way that conveys a very obvious meaning, it won't be penalized at all. If, however, you're using an expression or a word and it's not really clear exactly how that expression is fitting in to the meaning of what you're trying to convey, that's where it does become problematic. So again, CAEL is taken for people to enter a Canadian university, but it doesn't mean that you have to include strictly Canadian content as you're writing and speaking. It's all a matter of understanding what is this question asking me to talk about and how can I best support that. And provided your ideas are relevant and on topic, and again, the language you're including conveys that meaning very clearly, please don't worry about that. It won't affect your score. Excellent question. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, of course. And then a follow-up to that is, if I have a speech impediment or a heavy accent, will that affect my my speaking score?
There is I'm trying to think of the right word myself. If you do have a speech impediment, some people might have a stutter, that sort of idea. Of course, that is going to affect the delivery skills. There's actually an accommodations form on the website. So when you go to cael.ca, and this is not something you do the night before the test, I have to caution you on that. This takes planning. So if you know you're going to take the CAEL test, you would want to, as you're registering, look up the section online that talks about accommodations, and that is something that you would discuss with the testing center or with the proctor who might administer your test from home. So again, there are parameters put in place as we don't want to penalize people that have an impediment to that degree. But again, it's up to you to take the initiative to seek these services out and put them into place before you take the test. Please don't show up at a testing center and expect on the spot these accommodations to be done, as it would be too late at that point in time, right? And I'm sorry, the second half, it was speech impediment and
accents.
Accents, thank you. Yeah. So again, accents, as we said, they're beautiful. They're to be celebrated. Yvonne has a different accent than me, and I can understand him quite clearly. It's not the accent that's going to prevent people from understanding us. It's how we choose to stress those words and how we enunciate and blend them. So if you are speaking in such a heavy accent to the point where people cannot understand in English, then yes, that is going to affect the score. I know there are audiobooks and such. If you want to go old school and look at the library, you can work on audiobooks and listen and go through some practice there as well. Sometimes taking a class with like a prep class or a conversation club can help as well. But yeah, we need to make sure that your speech is understandable to the listener in general for you to do well. Mm-hmm.
Of course, amazing. A couple more questions here. So if I'm unhappy with my speaking score specifically, am I able to just retake the speaking portion of the test?
The answer to that is not going to make you happy. Unfortunately, no. It's a C, sorry, not CICC. It's the way the test is set up. Yes, if you are going to redo the test for now anyway, you would do the entire test in one again. So you will get the scoring, by the way, you get an individual score in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And then those 4 scores are averaged together. And it's the overall score that's going to be sent out to the institutions. So yes, if you wanted to raise one of your scores, unfortunately, you would have to redo the entire test. As again, those scores get averaged together for the overall. Yeah, not the answer you want, I know.
No, amazing. Okay. And then lastly, if I want to improve my speaking score or want more material, I see some links in the chat. Where should I go to figure out more about this?
Yeah, so please come take any of our free webinars. So again, my job in the company with Prometric, who administers this CAEL test, I'm an online instructor. So we go on Zoom a couple times a month with free webinars, and these ones are 2 hours long. So we actually do go through, say, all 5 different speaking responses and so on. So I look at these sessions on Zoom as an online study group. They're usually quite small. Sometimes even on one day, I'll have 3 or 4 people jump in as an online study group, and me as the teacher knowing the test quite well. We can really take our time to walk through questions. You would ask your questions. We'd answer them as a group, and hopefully you come away from the sessions with lots of strategies. So if you visit our website, it's CAEL, spelled C-A-E-L, and then .ca, Canadian test. You'll find a Prepare for CAEL tab right at the top. And there are lots of free prep resources you can access there. Our YouTube channel as well, by the way, does have quite a few series for free that you can access. So CAEL Official. And there's an old series there that I did, well, a couple of years ago, I guess, when we were first locked down and people wanted to study, what would they do? So I think I've recorded about 42 different episodes there, and you'll find them organized by playlist. So speaking is the skill, of course, you're looking for help with. Check out the speaking playlist under the CAEL Live tab, and you'll see a variety of episodes that are anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. So really bite-sized. You can do one here, one there, gather some speaking tips, and also look at different speaking questions too, and hear different speaking responses. So all of these are free to access, and I really encourage you to check them out for sure.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We are over our time, but real big thank you to Prometric and CAEL for presenting to us today. We appreciate you coming and taking time out of your day to help us improve the speaking portion of our test. For the audience, you will receive a recorded version of this webinar by email. So if there's any specific portions of the webinar you want to go through and re-listen to, you'll be able to do that. So look out, keep an eye out on your email inbox for that tomorrow. Any closing statements from Prometric?
One, if I may, I've included my favorite thing of all, which is the CAEL Path to Success graphic, along with what Brandy mentioned in terms of where to find these prep materials. So both of these are here, and I encourage folks to go to both of them and really acquaint themselves of the wealth of information that Brandy and team have created, but also keep checking the CAEL Path to Success to understand that many have gone before you, including yours truly, with this accent. So, and we got you. It's there for you to take. So many thanks as always to Riley and team. We're very grateful to always have the opportunity to connect with so many people from various places. Really, truly joy. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you again. And thank you, audience, for joining. Keep an eye out on your email inbox tomorrow because you'll receive a recording. And everyone have a nice evening, morning, or afternoon, depending on where you are.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks again.